On America's morning television, Michael Strahan always appears as the rarest kind of success story, a rise that the entire nation admires. He was once the steel wall of the New York Giants, the man who recorded an NFL record 22.5 sacks in a single season, a mark still spoken of as one of the greatest achievements in league history. He is a Super Bowl XL champion, the heart of millions of football fans, and after hanging up his cleats, he moved into television even faster than he exploded off the line of scrimmage. From Good Morning America to Fox NFL Sunday, from national game shows to his own branded programs, Michael Strahan became America's familiar face, an energetic, funny, smart, and genuine storyteller. Beyond that, he built a successful fashion brand, wrote books, gave back through charity, and became the model of an athlete who knows how to reinvent himself after leaving the field. Strahan's career is the story of turning talent, discipline, and grit into a multi-field empire, a peak few Americans ever reach. But behind that dazzling success lie pains he has never allowed morning television to touch. The back that was once his greatest weapon now feels like it's being stabbed every morning because of 15 brutal years of NFL collisions. 2 divorces left countless wounds in his heart. Long, ugly legal battles forced him to face skeptical stares and public judgment. And the deepest pain of all is his daughter's fight against illness, a battle no trophy can ease. Behind the wide smile millions love are the nights he lies awake, anxious, hurting, hiding every scar, so he can keep showing up as America's burst of positive energy. Yet it is in that darkness that Strahan's true will shines brightest. He refuses to let pain defeat him or let adversity define him. Michael Strahan still gets up, still moves forward, still smiles, because he believes a person's worth is measured not in moments of glory, but in how they survive the storm. And the haunting question remains, if America knew everything this man has endured, would they still think he's just the happy smile on TV? If you want to keep exploring the painful yet extraordinary hidden chapters of Michael Strahan's journey, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part. When the studio lights go out, and the familiar smile lives only in the memory of the morning, Michael Strahan's real story takes us back to years few people know about, years that didn't begin in Texas, where he was born, but in Mannheim, Germany, inside the gray, cold military housing blocks for American service families. It wasn't a joyful childhood environment, it was a closed-off, suffocatingly disciplined world where the sound of military boots hitting concrete every dawn was more familiar than children's laughter. In that setting, Michael, a big black kid who looked completely different from everyone else, grew up like a shadow caught between 2 cultures. In Germany, he wasn't German. When people talked about America, he didn't feel truly American either. He existed in a foggy limbo of identity, suspended like a bridge with no beginning and no end, built only to connect 2 worlds he could never fully join. That feeling of being the outsider followed him from the playground to the classroom. Most of his schoolmates were white military kids who looked at him like he was from another planet, darker skin, huge frame, broad shoulders, a voice that didn't sound like theirs. Even the way he ran became a joke. Curious stares, innocently cruel questions, laughter behind his back, it all built into a quiet, burning sadness he had nowhere to put. Many days he came home to the tiny apartment, took off his shoes as quietly as possible, sat in the corner of his room, and wondered why he was so different. His father, a strict, no-nonsense soldier, loved him in the only way he knew, cold, silent, tough. His mother was gentler, but she was busy raising the whole family, and rarely had time to sit and listen to sadness he didn't even have words for yet. So the loneliness just kept filling up, like rainwater slowly rising in a room no one noticed was leaking. On winter evenings when the fog was so thick, the whole housing area disappeared. Michael felt his own invisibility most clearly. No roots, no safety net, no real home the way other kids had one. At recess, while everyone else played, he often stood at the edge of the yard, hands in pockets, watching like a spectator instead of a participant. His awkward, oversized body made him an easy target. He ran slow, he was clumsy, he was too big, he didn't fit. And when kids want to be cruel, they don't need a reason. His only question back then was, why can't I be like them? He started believing something was wrong with him. That feeling of never being good enough, never belonging, never truly seen. It sank into his soul quietly and permanently, like a hairline crack that would later become the foundation for every inner battle he would ever fight. The most heartbreaking part, nobody knew it was happening. Nobody saw that little boy trying to make himself smaller in a world that kept telling him he was too big. Nobody noticed the swallowed tears behind the forced smiles. Nobody realized that one day these seemingly small wounds would become both the fierce, merciless fuel that pushed Michael forward, and the shadow that would keep him from ever feeling completely at peace. And in the silence of that German childhood, with cold wind blowing through the military housing every night, a story began to form, the story of a boy who belonged nowhere, but who would one day become one of the men America thinks it knows best. Yet they don't know that the loneliness, that feeling of nobody really gets me, is the root wound that has followed Michael his entire life, and the key to understanding both his tragedy and his extraordinary strength. When the lost childhood in Germany still scarred his soul, Michael Strahan was suddenly sent back to Houston, the hot, loud, unmistakably American city unlike anything he'd ever known. But the return didn't feel like coming home. It felt like being violently thrown out of the only world he understood. From the orderly, icy military base he was dropped into a completely different universe, traffic everywhere, black, white, Latino cultures colliding, huge schools, people talking so fast he couldn't keep up, and expectations heavier than he could have imagined. His uncle's house, family, yes, still didn't feel like home. The food, the slang, even the way people smiled, made him feel like he was living someone else's life. In Germany he had been the black kid among white people. In Houston he became the weird German kid, not fully American, not fully urban. Every school day was an emotional experiment, walking into class, trying to understand the teacher, trying to connect with classmates, but sliding out of every conversation like the world was moving without waiting for him. And then came football, the religion of Houston. Michael had never trained seriously. In Germany there were no teams, no one to play with, no coaches. In Texas kids were born knowing how to run routes and hit. He was thrown onto the team like a calf tossed into a pack of wolves. His first practice was a shock. He couldn't keep up with anyone, couldn't catch anyone, fell constantly, was so winded he could barely breathe. Teammates looked at him with half pity, half mockery. This guy's gonna make it. He's from Germany. Do they even have football there? Some laughed out loud when he gasped for air in the middle of the field. That laugh cut the same old wound from Mannheim all over again. Once again he was the outsider. Once again his body was the reason people dismissed him. Once again the feeling not good enough came back stronger, sharper, because this time he wasn't a little kid anymore. And that humiliation, instead of breaking him, woke something he didn't even know he had: raw defiance. Every time he was left in the dust, something growled quietly inside his chest, weak but stubborn, that he would never again let anyone else write his story. On those scorching Houston afternoons, he ran alone until his legs gave out, did push-ups until his arms shook, studied tackling like he was relearning how to live. At night, while everyone slept, he stood in front of the mirror staring at the huge body he used to hate and whispered, "You're gonna make it." Those days were hell, having to face every insecurity, every ounce of self-doubt and loneliness his childhood had planted, but they were also the launch pad. Because on that little Houston field, a new seed was planted, the seed of relentless grit, survival instinct, and the burning need to prove himself. Like Simon Cowell once locked in EMI's mailroom, humiliated but awakened, Michael Strahan was forged by the mocking laughter, the painful falls, and the nights wondering if he was worth anything at all. That year, the boy who had never belonged anywhere finally found a reason to stand tall, not to be like everyone else, but to become the strongest version of himself he had ever dared imagine. And from that small private hell, the journey that would make Strahan one of America's biggest icons began quietly, painfully, unstoppably. And when the kid once laughed at in Houston finally touched the door to the NFL, a door tens of thousands of athletes don't even dare dream of, Michael Strahan thought the worst pain of his life was behind him. The truth was far crueler. The NFL is not a dream. It's a battlefield where young men walk in with bright eyes and leave with bodies that will never be whole again. For Strahan, his early years with the New York Giants felt like being thrown back into the loneliness of childhood, only this time he had to face the doubt of an entire city. Right from his rookie season, injuries arrived like a cold warning that the NFL has no room for weakness. One wrong hit, one mistimed collision, one misplaced step, his knee ballooned. He limped into the locker room on crutches while teammates whispered, "Looks like he can't handle the NFL." No one said it to his face, but the looks all meant the same thing: you're not good enough. He felt it every day. In meeting rooms, few people paid attention to him. On the practice field, coaches glanced once and looked away. In the locker room, conversations revolved around other defensive stars in the league, guys considered worthy of the spot he was clinging to by his fingernails. New York media, pressure like no other for anyone wearing a Giants jersey, showed no mercy. One article called him big but slow, another hinted he might be a wasted draft pick. Every word cut like a blade, and in the middle of that storm, injuries kept coming, testing how far his will could bend before it broke. Twisted ankles, stabbing back pain, torn calves. Every week a new body part screamed. Team doctors always said rest a few days, but the NFL waits for no one. If you sit, someone else is ready to take your job. And the thing Strahan feared most wasn't the pain, it was getting cut. In the NFL, a young player under suspicion disappears faster than you can blink. No money is guaranteed. Every dream is fragile. Strahan knew one small coaching decision could bury everything he had worked for, and the little boy who once stood on the edge of the playground in Mannheim faced again the terror of not belonging. Some nights he sat alone in his small New Jersey apartment, staring out at the dark, unfamiliar street, asking himself if he really deserved to be in the NFL. He remembered the mockery in Houston, the abandonment in Germany, practices where the whole team ran ahead while he wheezed behind. His greatest fear wasn't failure, it was going back to the old life of never being taken seriously. In the darkness, when there were no cheers or stadium lights, Strahan felt the full weight of doubt from teammates, media, former supporters, and worst of all, from himself. The NFL, for all its glamour, was lonelier than anywhere he had ever been. And in those early years he wasn't a legend, a champion, or a national TV personality. He was just a young man fighting with everything he had to hold on to a dream, while his body and spirit were constantly torn apart. That was the first truly dark chapter of Strahan's life, not because he failed, but because he didn't know if anyone truly believed he would succeed. Yet it was in those lonely nights, in the humiliation of doubt and the terror of being discarded, that something began to burn, a small stubborn flame that would eventually turn the doubted rookie into one of the most powerful icons the NFL has ever seen. But then in the middle of the dark years when New York tested a doubted rookie's resolve, the unthinkable started happening. One autumn morning in the stuffy Giants film room, Strahan watched tape of himself, and for the first time he saw what the world still couldn't. He wasn't chasing everyone anymore, he was catching them, then passing them. The heavy steps from Houston had become explosive strides. The once clumsy hands now struck exactly where the opponent was weakest. And most importantly, he stopped asking, "Do I belong?" and started asking, "How great can I become?" The NFL hadn't changed, but Strahan had changed completely. That transformation exploded in the seasons that followed, as if he had compressed every ounce of childhood and young adult humiliation, every doubt, every laugh at his expense, and unleashed it on the field with devastating power that shook the entire league. Season after season, Michael evolved from question mark to every quarterback's nightmare. And then came the year of destiny, 2001, the year Michael Strahan's name was etched into NFL history, with a number that forced the whole league to bow: 22.5 sacks. Every quarterback takedown was an exclamation point, an answer to everyone who had ever doubted him. But glory is never free. Every rush at the QB was a 20-30 miles per hour car crash. Every tackle was a small earthquake inside his body. Behind that legendary season were mornings he had to brace one hand against the wall just to stand up. Nights spent in ice baths, teeth clenched so hard his jaw shook from the cold. The team doctor once told him, "Your body is taking hits equal to being in several car wrecks every week." Knees with torn cartilage never got fixed. His neck so stiff that after games he needed 30 minutes of hot towels just to turn his head. His back, already battered from his younger years, stabbed like a knife every time he bent to tie his shoes. fingers bent permanently from getting caught in face masks, yanked, twisted unnaturally. A reporter once asked, "Aren't you afraid?" Strahan just smiled. "Yeah, I'm afraid, but I'm more afraid of getting cut." That's the truest answer about the NFL. Glory belongs only to those willing to sacrifice their own flesh and bone, and Strahan sacrificed every piece, every bone fragment, every tendon fiber, every night of sleep to keep the spot he once trembled he didn't deserve. When he won Defensive Player of the Year, the world saw a confident, radiant, powerful man, but no one saw the moment right after, in the locker room, when he collapsed into a chair and let out a breath so long it was as if his lungs had fought the entire season. No one knew that to take the field in weeks 14, 15, 16, he needed pain-killing shots so strong. His legs were numb through the first quarter. No one knew that when people called him sack master, defensive monster, living legend, he went home and lay sideways hugging a pillow so his back wouldn't touch the mattress because the pain was too sharp. But that is what made him a legend, not the strength, but the endurance. He endured pain ordinary people cannot imagine. He carried pressure ordinary people cannot bear. He lived up to expectations he himself wasn't sure he could meet. And then, as if the story were written too perfectly to be real, he closed his career with the Super Bowl XL victory, one of the greatest games in NFL history. The Giants upset the 18-0 Patriots in a miracle the entire country still talks about. For Strahan, it wasn't just a win, it was deliverance. When he held his helmet, looked up as confetti fell like snow, he knew he had completed the mission the lonely boy in Germany never dared dream, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the one who refused to stay down. But the photo of him beaming in the confetti only tells half the story. The other half is in the scars, torn biceps, knees repeatedly drained and injected, fingers that will never straighten again. The other half is in the mornings he has to push off the headboard just to sit up. The other half is in the spine already degenerating in his early 30s. The NFL gave him glory, but the NFL also stole something he can never get back: the youth of his body. When his final season ended and Strahan announced his retirement, America called it going out on top. Only he knew it was the moment his body truly began its irreversible decline, and that the price of glory would follow him for the rest of his life. Only when he walked away from the game did he understand the brutal truth: glory is built not just with stats, but with flesh and bone. And then came Super Bowl XL feat, the night America hailed Michael Strahan as a hero, the night NFL history turned. The night the Giants beat the undefeated Patriots and wrote a chapter every football fan will remember forever. It was his final game, and the most beautiful moment of a 15-year career filled with blood, sweat, and pain no words can describe. When the final whistle blew and red and blue confetti covered the Arizona sky, Strahan spread his arms, tilted his face to the lights, as if at last he was free from every doubt that had haunted him since day one. He had won. Not just the Patriots, not just the NFL, not just prejudice, but the laughter from Germany, the mockery from Houston, the doubt from New York. The legend was born in that moment, but the cruel part is legends are beautiful only to those watching from the outside. For the man living it, it was a few minutes of ecstasy on top of a lifetime of damage. While the team celebrated, while New York streets filled with cheering fans, while headlines called him sack master, heart of the defense, the man who changed Giants' destiny, Strahan felt a strange emptiness creep into his heart. On the field he was worshipped as a hero. Off the field he was a man staring at a life quietly cracking apart. His marriage by then was only a shell. Arguments simmered, distance grew. Months away for road games only widened the gap. Husband and wife talked more about schedules, bills and responsibilities, and less about dreams, hope or love. And the worst part, it was all happening when he needed an anchor most. At the moment the whole world was cheering him, he had nowhere he truly belonged. He stood at the absolute peak every NFL player dreams of, yet his soul was so exhausted, he couldn't feel joy fully. The night after the Super Bowl, while the team partied, Strahan smiled, raised his glass, hugged teammates hard. But when the party ended, and he was alone in his hotel room, he sat on the bed, unwrapped the tape from his shoulders and knees, heard his bones crack like a reminder his body was no longer that of a 20-year-old. He opened a bottle of water, looked in the mirror, and faced a painful truth. I have never felt this lonely. His greatest success arrived exactly when his heart was most tired. Part of him wanted to dedicate that Super Bowl moment to his wife, to share the joy, to feel the warmth of home. But reality reminded him that was no longer possible. The wounds in the marriage were too deep. Real conversations had stopped long ago. Misunderstanding had replaced understanding. A football legend, yet a man standing on the edge of personal collapse. That is the cruel paradox of Strahan's life. The strongest man on the field was the most broken when he stepped off it. Peak on the outside, abyss on the inside. People call Super Bowl XL the most beautiful moment of his career. Few know it was also when he faced his own loneliness most clearly. Fans see the Super Bowl ring. They don't see the nights he tossed and turned in a dark room wondering what life after football would even look like. They see the smile on the field. They don't see the silent tears when he realized his family could not be saved. They see a legend. They don't see a human being coming apart. And that is the most painful truth of that Super Bowl night. The team's perfect victory came with the quiet defeat of his heart. When he announced his retirement the following year, the media called it the perfect ending. For Strahan, it was the period at the end of a chapter he was both proud of and devastated by, proud, pained, and empty all at once. Behind that glory he understood what lay ahead was not relief, but confrontation with all the darkness he had outrun for 15 years with hits, roars, and stadium lights. And so the real Michael Strahan journey, the journey to find himself after the whole world has applauded, began at the most triumphant moment of his life. And just as the Super Bowl lights had barely faded, while the cheers of millions of fans still echoed somewhere in memory, Michael Strahan stepped into a different kind of battle, not on the gridiron, but in his own life. A battle with no helmet, no teammates beside him, no coach to guide him. Only hurt, misunderstanding, and accusations that tore his heart apart piece by piece. His first marriage, a youthful love that felt unbreakable, collapsed before he even realized that love and fame sometimes can't coexist. He loved with the sincerity of youth, but the NFL demanded he always be absent. Road games, strategy meetings that ran late into the night, injuries that left him stretched out on the couch instead of walking hand in hand with his wife. All of it created a distance neither of them was mature enough to bridge. When that first marriage ended, Strahan thought it was the greatest pain of his life. He had no idea what lay ahead would be far more brutal. He entered his second marriage hoping to reclaim the peace and warmth he'd lost during the high-pressure NFL years. But the very place he expected healing turned into a battlefield that bled him dry day after day. Small arguments became major wars. Distance became an abyss, and the thing he feared most finally happened. Love turned to suspicion. Then one day everything exploded. Serious allegations were made. Courtrooms became public showdowns. The media smelled blood and descended like a pack of starving wolves. Every article, every photo, every story, true or false, was ripped apart, exaggerated, twisted. Strahan's private life, already fragile, was flipped inside out for all of America to watch like weekend entertainment. They stopped talking about Strahan the devoted father. They stopped talking about Strahan the Super Bowl champion. They talked about Strahan the man who failed at marriage, the man dragged through legal fights, the man accused, scrutinized, and mocked. He became the punchline of sarcasm. Talk shows said his name with a smirk. Tabloids ran inside sources claiming Strahan wasn't the man he appeared to be. People love watching heroes fall, and they enjoyed every second of his. But the worst pain wasn't the damaged reputation. It wasn't the finances paraded in public. It wasn't the mockery from strangers who'd never met him. The thing that hurt Strahan most was watching the home he'd worked so hard to build crumble right in front of him. Evenings coming home to rooms silent and cruel. No more laughter. No more warmth. No more family. He sat alone in a huge empty house, listening to the clock tick like a countdown to the end of the life he used to know. If the Super Bowl was the peak, this was the abyss. And the contrast felt almost cruel. People loved the image of Strahan bulldozing the biggest quarterbacks in the league. but they never saw the same man standing in front of a judge, trying to stay calm while his private life was dissected like a museum exhibit. They didn't see him turn away to hide tears when the press spun lies. They didn't know about the nights he sat motionless in his parked car, engine off, staring at streetlights and asking himself, how did everything end up like this? Just like Simon Cowell got swallowed by the Lauren Silverman scandal, judged by people who weren't in the story, Strahan became the face of a tragedy he never imagined he'd live. Not just misunderstood, not just scrutinized, but stripped bare piece by piece, until even he didn't recognize the man in the stories the media invented. Yet through all the chaos, what hurt Strahan most was the helplessness. He could beat an entire defensive line. He could swing the outcome of a championship game. He could change a franchise's fate, but he couldn't save a dying marriage, and he couldn't save himself from the growing loneliness inside. That's the tragedy stadium lights never illuminate, the tragedy of a man who tried everything to be a good husband, a good father, a good man, yet still failed at things beyond his control. Every bruise Strahan collected over 15 NFL years healed, but the wounds from 2 broken marriages, never fully closed. They followed him for years like a shadow he couldn't outrun. And in the accusations, the courtrooms, those sleepless nights, Michael Strahan didn't just lose a home, he lost a part of himself. Television doors swung open right as his second marriage closed in agony, as if fate wanted to test how many times he could still get back up. And he did get back up, but not with the freedom of someone who'd escaped pain, but with the burden of a man running as fast as he could, so the emptiness inside wouldn't swallow him whole. Off's NFL Sunday brought him on as an analyst. Then Live, with Kelly and Michael called. Then Good Morning America, America's biggest morning show. In just a few years, Michael Strahan became one of the most familiar faces in the country. Every morning millions of households turned on the TV and saw his wide smile, warm voice, effortless joy. And America said, that's the most likable man on television. But that same man was living the loneliest chapter of his life. Fame came too fast, too hard, bringing pressure no one saw. As a player he could make mistakes. If he fell, he just got back up. On television he wasn't allowed to mess up. One off-key comment could become tomorrow's headline. One quiet moment could be misread by viewers. 1 second without energy could be labeled off his game. The pressure arrived silently but crushed without mercy. On air he had to be happy, always likable, always full of energy, always the Michael Strahan America loves. Off air, in the moments no one saw, he curled up in a dark room where his real sadness had nowhere to go. The wounds from the divorces were still raw, but no one was allowed to see them. Every time he walked onto a set, he had to lock away every hurt, every worry, every exhaustion, and hide them behind that famous gap-toothed smile, as if they never existed. That's the price of television. You belong to America, but you lose yourself. While viewers saw him as their reliable morning friend, Strahan lived a double life, one side bathed in bright lights, the other hollow and spreading inside his chest. No more football field left to channel pain through raw power, no locker room to vent to teammates, no roar of the crowd after battle. Now he sat alone backstage, listening to his own heartbeat echo in the silence, wondering why the more famous he became, the lonelier he felt. Some days, after wrapping GMA, he'd step out of the studio into a cold New York morning, look up at a gray sky, and feel clearly that he'd become part of a giant machine he couldn't escape. A king on television's throne, but also its prisoner. Strahan once said in a private interview, "Television can make you feel like the whole world loves you, but it can also make you realize no one actually knows who you are." That wasn't whining. It was the confession of a man feeling himself slowly consumed by the expectations of millions of strangers. Every morning the audience got energy from him, but no one knew that to produce that smile he first had to fight chronic back pain from his NFL days. No one knew that when the cameras stopped, he sometimes sat still for minutes just breathing deeply to steady himself before putting the happy mask back on. No one knew that when he got home, the huge apartment felt so cold that the man who once played in front of 90,000 people felt tiny. He often asked himself, "Why am I doing what I love?" and still not feeling happy? The answer was right there. Fame doesn't heal old scars, it only covers them with lights, laughter, and glory. Others think you should be grateful for, but covering isn't healing. Year by year he became more famous, more beloved, more omnipresent on major shows. But the farther he went in television, the farther he drifted from himself. That's the special loneliness of people at the very top. Everyone sees you, but no one really sees you. A king on a throne, but that throne is colder, heavier and lonelier than anyone imagines. And while America cheered their smiling host, Strahan started asking the question the rest of his life would revolve around: what does success even mean if I no longer recognize the man in the mirror? After years lost in television lights and unseen silence, Strahan stepped into the role he considers the most sacred of his life, being a father. If the football field was where he once proved his strength, if television was where he brought smiles to America, then family, even broken, was where he let his softest, most vulnerable heart live. After the divorces, he no longer had an intact home, no life partner walking beside him, no cozy family evenings watching TV together like he'd always wanted. But he still had his kids, and he decided the rest of his life would revolve around those two words. People who worked with him during that period say he could be in a meeting in New York, get a phone call, and immediately book the next flight to California just to make a 12-minute parent-teacher conference. Some days he'd shoot GMA at 7 a.m., do Fox meetings at noon, then jump on an afternoon flight to take his daughter to gymnastics or watch his son's piano recital. He flew so often the airport staff knew his face, but no one knew the real reason he was desperately trying to fill the voids his failed marriages had left behind. The world saw him on TV every day. What they didn't see was the man quietly dragging a suitcase through airports, sitting alone in coach, even though he could afford first class, because he didn't want to spend money on himself when his kids might need it for something else. He once said, "I lost my family once, I won't let it happen to my children." But the world didn't know how much he had to sacrifice to keep that promise. One winter evening, after a long flight and an exhausting workday, Strahan walked in the door and saw his daughter, one of the human beings he loves most in the world, looking at him with red eyes. She asked one simple question that stabbed him like a knife. "Daddy, why can't we all live together?" The question choked him so hard he couldn't breathe. He knelt down, pulled her into his arms, but couldn't find any explanation good enough to heal a child's broken heart. All the tears he'd hidden through injuries, swallowed during media attacks, held back in front of cameras, finally fell because of a question he could never answer honestly, because Daddy failed. That night, after the kids were asleep, Strahan sat in the pitch-black living room, no lights, no TV, just staring at the hands that once pushed away the biggest linemen in the NFL, and he cried. Not loud sobs, quiet tears of a man who always tried to appear strong to the world, but completely shattered in front of his children. Those are moments only he and four walls ever knew. No cameras, no audience, no glory, just a father trying to forgive himself. And in those moments, Strahan understood that real strength isn't sacking a 260-pound quarterback, winning a Super Bowl, or hosting in front of millions. Real strength is getting up every single day to keep being a dad, even while your heart is still bleeding. The world sees Strahan on TV as a joyful, high-energy, witty guy always ready with a laugh. But when it comes to his kids, he's a completely different person, fragile, sensitive, easily wounded, yet unshakably devoted. Colleagues say he could walk into the studio exhausted with dark circles, but the second he got a text that said, "Daddy, I miss you," his face would light up and he'd rearrange everything to fly out that night. He could be in constant back pain from football, but he'd still bend down to tie his son's shoes without letting the boy see him wince. He could have just survived a day of media criticism, yet still do silly voices on FaceTime so his daughter would fall asleep smiling. That's not showy sacrifice, that's instinct. That's the love of a man who once lost his family and swore his children would never feel abandoned. To the world, Michael Strahan is the strong man. To his kids, he's the most vulnerable, because only they can break his heart with a single sentence. That's the paradox of his life. On the field he was invincible. On television he's America's sunshine. but at home he's a dad trying to patch cracks he never meant to create. And on this post-divorce fatherhood journey, Strahan learned a lesson bigger than anything the NFL ever taught him. A man's strength isn't measured by trophies, but by the love he gives the little people who depend on him to feel safe, loved, and like they still have a family. But life, which had already tested Michael Strahan countless times with loneliness, heartbreak and pressure, still wasn't done with him. If the NFL years tore his body apart, if television drained his soul, the next tragedy struck the one place still untouched inside him. The heart of a father keeps only for his children. One late afternoon in 2023, as Strahan was preparing to go on air for Good Morning America, his assistant walked up, face ashen. "Michael, Isabella needs to talk to you, right now." He left the set in silence, heart pounding so hard enough to crack his ribs. The call lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough to collapse his entire world. "Daddy, I have a tumor in my brain." His daughter's voice trembled, thin as wind. He stood frozen in the hallway of ABC Studios, the same walls that had watched him smile for years now, watching a man break into pieces. What followed came in fractured flashes: hospital smells, bleach, beeping monitors, doctors talking about surgery, risks, recurrence. Isabella, the radiant girl who played basketball, walked red carpets with him, laughed loud and called him her big teddy bear, now lay in a hospital bed, hair tied back, ready for brain surgery. Strahan sat beside her, holding her hand while his own shook like never before. The man who had demolished the strongest quarterbacks in the NFL, shattered steel defensive lines, stared down 90,000 screaming fans without blinking, could now do nothing but hope and be terrified. The surgery lasted hours. He didn't eat, didn't drink, couldn't sit still. He paced the endless hospital corridor, every step feeling like it crushed his own heart. When the surgeon finally emerged, Strahan looked into their eyes and asked in a hoarse whisper, "Is she still here?" The operation was successful, but the war had only just begun. A brain tumor doesn't end with one surgery. It opens months no father should ever have to witness. Chemotherapy started. Isabella's small body reacted violently: uncontrollable vomiting, rapid weight loss, headaches like invisible hands crushing her skull. Some days she couldn't open her eyes. Some nights she curled into a ball, pain so bad she couldn't speak. And Strahan, the man who once cried over, "Why can't we all live together?" now cried over a far crueler question: "Daddy, am I going to die?" He couldn't answer, because he didn't know. He could only hold her and sob. For the first time in years, he didn't care about work, fame, or airtime. He disappeared from Good Morning America without notice. Contracts were postponed, schedules canceled. The press wondered, the public speculated. Michael Strahan didn't care. The world could wait. His daughter could not. He was at the hospital every day, dawn to midnight. He dozed off in plastic chairs, brought warm towels for her forehead, helped her take tiny steps from bed to bathroom, wiped her tears as her hair fell out in clumps. And every day when she finally closed her exhausted eyes, he stared at that face, the face he'd loved from the first moment he held her, and asked what sin of his had made her suffer like this. The fear she might not survive tortured him every night. Some nights, he stepped outside the hospital, leaned against the wall, looked up at the sky and let out a choked animal roar. "Please don't take my baby," he whispered over and over like a desperate prayer. But prayers couldn't stop her pain. One day Isabella looked at him through exhausted eyes and said, "Daddy, it hurts so much." All he could do was squeeze her hand tighter, as if letting go would let the world pull her away. On the football field, Strahan always knew what to do: hit harder, run faster, fight to the final whistle. In this fight he was powerless. He couldn't tackle the disease, couldn't block the pain for her, couldn't take it himself, couldn't not be afraid. One night, in a room lit only by a small lamp, he watched her sleep and tears fell without stopping. "Money can't save her, fame can't save her. Everything I've accomplished means nothing." That was the moment a man realized his great career, the victories, the cheers, none of it mattered against a child's suffering. And he understood the cruelest truth. This was the one game where he had no control. When the first round of chemo ended, Isabella was so weak doctors suggested delaying the next phase. Strahan sat in meetings hearing about risks, timelines, side effects, while the only thing he heard was, "My child is hurting." Someone asked, "Do you want more time off work? We can make the call." Strahan answered simply, "Work is no longer the priority, my child is," and it truly was. Month after month he lived in the hospital, fast food, cheap vending machine coffee, days without shaving, nights without full sleep, but he was there, for every moment, every small step forward, every tear, every faint smile. When the photo of Isabella shaving her head for chemo went viral, America finally understood why Strahan had vanished. But no one knew that before it was posted. He stood behind the camera trying to stay composed while his brave daughter said, "I want other people to know they're not alone." For the first time in months Strahan felt his heart not just broken, but swelling with pride so fierce enough to choke him. That fight didn't end quickly. It wasn't gentle, it didn't have a clean finish, but it did something no previous pain had. It stripped Michael Strahan completely bare, not the NFL legend, not the TV star, but a father willing to trade everything just to keep his child breathing. And while the world will remember him for records, shows and titles, for him the defining memory of his life will forever be those hospital days, when he learned the deepest truth: a father's love can't stop illness, but it can keep his child from ever fighting alone. The months spent battling at Isabella's bedside changed Michael Strahan in ways no game, no injury, no spotlight ever had. When his daughter began recovering little by little, when the first chemo cycle ended, when her weak smile started returning, the world assumed he felt relief. The truth was the opposite. That's when the invisible fractures inside him began to crack wide open. For months he'd lived in survival mode, hospital, home, hospital, thinking only about whether she would make it. Now that her body was no longer critical, his mind, which had been compressed too long, started to collapse. Every night he lay down and terror swallowed him like a black wave. He jolted awake from nightmares of Isabella on the hospital bed, IV lines, alarms blaring. He woke gasping, chest crushed as if the whole world sat on it. Some nights he didn't sleep a single minute. His entire body ached as though every nerve screamed after years of carrying worry for his child, his own grief and work pressure. His back, already destroyed by the NFL, betrayed him worst. Every morning before he could stand straight, he braced one hand against the wall, face twisted as pain shot through his spine. Sometimes he stood motionless for minutes, eyes closed, forcing himself to breathe through it, just to reach the bathroom, just to get dressed, just to walk onto the GMA set so no one would know he'd nearly broken the night before. Because even when his mind was exhausted and his body falling apart, America still expected him on TV every morning. They wanted his joy, his humor, his big energetic smile. They wanted Michael Strahan the host, not Michael Strahan the father who'd just lived his worst nightmare, and he understood that. So every morning he looked in the mirror, saw bloodshot sleepless eyes, massaged his clenched jaw, and forced his lips into the famous smile millions knew and loved. A beautiful smile, the smile America adored, a real smile, if you didn't look too closely. His body was harder to hide. Shoulders that couldn't lift past 90 degrees, knees stiff as rock from football days, neck rigid from months bent over a hospital bed. But the soul, that's where the deepest damage lived. He jumped at every phone ring. If Isabella texted even minutes late, he imagined a dozen disasters. Seeing a random child laugh on the street made him choke up, remembering when his daughter couldn't. Walking onto set he asked himself, "How can I make people laugh when I'm trying, not sure I won't collapse?" It wasn't a question of professionalism. It was a silent cry for help he never dared voice. Because on television you're not allowed to be sad, not allowed to be tired, not allowed to break. You have to shine, even when your heart is pitch black. And so Strahan kept fighting, not against quarterbacks, not against public pressure, but against the darkness in his own head. Close colleagues say they sometimes caught him alone in the hallway minutes before air, staring at the floor, taking huge breaths like he was about to step into another kind of battle, not for ratings, but to keep himself from shattering live on national television. That's what America never saw. They didn't see him close his eyes for seconds to swallow fear. didn't see his hand tremble slightly holding cue cards, didn't see those broad shoulders starting to sag under years of unnamed pain. Strahan had become an expert at hiding hurt, just like he once hid injuries on the field. But one thing he couldn't conceal, the exhaustion in his eyes, not physical tiredness, but the weariness of a soul that had endured too much for too long. That was the invisible fracture phase of his life, the phase where no one could see the wounds, yet it was where he hurt the most. Because visible injuries heal faster, the ones buried deep linger, ache and smolder like cracks in a foundation. One careless step and the whole structure can collapse. Yet Michael Strahan kept walking forward, not because it didn't hurt, but because his daughter needed to see him strong. The world needed to see him smile, and he needed a reason to get up each morning, even if he had to brace against the wall, even if his back screamed, even if nightmares waited every night. When Michael Strahan turned 54, the world saw one of America's most successful men, NFL legend, television star, businessman, pop culture icon. But behind every title was a man living a chapter woven from threads of pain, gratitude, and a longing for peace he never knew in his younger years. At an age when many slow down, Strahan still stood in front of cameras every morning, still hosted major shows, still showed up with the familiar smile that made America feel the day started lighter. What viewers didn't see was how he got out of bed each morning, one hand against the wall, back hunched from the piercing pain that had followed him since his Giants days. Some mornings he stood motionless nearly a minute, waiting for the spasm to ease before he could walk to the bathroom. His hands sometimes shook from nerve pain, knees cracked, neck so stiff he turned his head slowly. The NFL had given him glory, but taken the ease of his own body. Television, where he became one of America's most trusted faces, had worn his soul thin from always having to be strong, always cheerful, always fine. At 54, Strahan knew better than anyone that he no longer wanted to chase praise, big contracts or public applause. The only thing he wanted, a peaceful life to be with his family. Isabella's ordeal had burned one lesson into him: time waits for no one. The years he spent chasing NFL dreams, television fame, all of it was gone, and he couldn't get it back. But the years ahead were different, and he was determined not to lose them. Strahan began rearranging his life. Unnecessary contracts, he said no. Overloaded TV projects, he cut them. Endless public appearances, he scaled back. He started saying no more than he ever had, because for most of his life he had tried to please the world. Now he lived for the people who called him dad. Off camera he took walks with his kids, cooked, talked, laughed more in small moments he used to miss. He loved mornings without alarms, quiet afternoons with no schedule, movie nights with his family. He cherished every normal breath Isabella took as the most precious gift life had given back after the nightmare. In one private interview, he said, "I spent half my life running as fast as I could. Now I just want to go slow enough not to miss what matters." That is Strahan at 54, the man who lived glory and agony, and now chooses presence. But time doesn't just take youth. It exposes the scars he tried to hide. Some days he walked onto the GMA set smiling with the crew, but the moment he sat down his back stabbed so sharply he had to close his eyes for seconds to hide the grimace. Some quiet evenings he looked in the mirror and saw a face that had changed: deeper crow's feet, dark circles, more salt than pepper in his hair. But what startled him most wasn't age, it was his eyes, tired, heavier, yet gentler. The eyes of someone who had walked through storms no one should face, and was still standing. At 54, Strahan no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. No pressure to be sackmaster, no need to be America's favorite host, no need to be the ultimate post-NFL success story. He just wanted to be Michael, the dad, the friend, the son, the man learning to choose peace over applause. There are moments when he watches Isabella smile, after months of pain, and his heart feels weightless. Moments when he hears his son yell "Dad" from the driveway, and feels a simple happiness no Super Bowl ring ever gave him. Evenings when he sits quietly by the window, watching sunset spill over the city, and thinks, if tomorrow I wasn't famous anymore, I'd be okay, as long as I still have my family. That is Strahan's Cowl 2025 moment, the awakening that fame is never the answer, that peace is something you choose and protect every single day. At 54, Michael Strahan understands life isn't measured by records or praise. It's measured by the seconds we hold the hand of someone we love, the smiles that return after storms, the ability to rise after your heart has been broken, and even with a tired body, a scarred soul, and a life filled with sorrow, he still doesn't bow his head. He has walked through hell, but now he is learning to build his own small heaven, built with family, with love, with presence, and with the deepest gratitude that he is still here, to be a father, to love, and to be loved. As Michael Strahan entered a quieter chapter of life, where fame stepped back and family moved to the foreground, he began to realize something his younger year, NFL seasons, and television mornings had never made clear. His true legacy wasn't where everyone once thought it was. It wasn't in the 22.5 sacks, a number America will talk about for generations. It wasn't in the Super Bowl ring fans still envy. It wasn't in the millions who watched him every morning. All of those, for all their brilliance, were just small chapters. Strahan's real legacy is written on the pages he filled in silence, pages with no stadium lights, no cameras, no applause. It lies in the fact that he endured mockery, from the kids in Germany who looked at him like an alien, to friends in Houston who laughed at the big kid who couldn't run fast, to New York reporters who once called him a draft bust, to the millions of comments after 2 divorces. Yet every time he was ridiculed, he refused to let his self-worth shatter. He turned the pain into fuel and kept moving forward. That is what made him the embodiment of the resilience America worships. His legacy isn't the stats, it's the spirit: fall and still rise, rise and still walk, walk even when your heart is full of cuts. But perhaps the most beautiful part of that legacy is the simplest, the way he fathers with total devotion. Not devotion in words, devotion in action. In cross-country flights, just to make a 10-minute parent-teacher conference. In sleepless nights in the hospital holding his daughter's hand while his back screamed with every tiny shift. In the genuine smile that broke through when he read "I miss you, Dad," even while his mind was strangled with worry about Isabella's health. In the quiet family dinners where he listened to school stories with eyes full of love, the eyes of a man who once lost a family and now knows the value of every second beside his children. People easily forget that famous men sometimes want the simplest things. For Strahan, the legacy he wants to leave isn't an NFL record, it's the memory in his children's hearts that Dad was always there, that Dad always listened, that Dad never abandoned them, no matter how far life pulled him. That is the victory he is proudest of. But his legacy stretches beyond his own family. It lives in the quiet, steady way he lifts up the Black community. Strahan knows what it feels like to be dismissed, surrounded by prejudice, judged by skin color instead of character. He lived with doubt through childhood in Germany, teenage years in Houston, and his early NFL days. Because of that, he became one of the strongest voices for Black youth looking for direction. He funds scholarships, he visits schools and speaks to students, he helps poor kids get access to sports training, education, and career opportunities. He speaks plainly about racism. He uses his platform to protect those who have no power. And he does it all not for praise, but because he knows that if someone had believed in him sooner, his own life might have had fewer scars. So he became the mentor an entire generation of Black kids needed, a role no one asked him to take, but one he chose himself. The way he simply exists is a legacy too. Strahan became America's symbol of human resilience, not athlete resilience, human resilience. A boy mocked who still believed in his dream. A man doubted who still stood under the weight of millions. A man who survived 2 divorces yet never gave up on family. A man who watched his daughter fight brutal cancer yet never let darkness pull him from fatherhood. A man who lived with chronic pain, sleeplessness, and anxiety, yet still walked on television every morning to make a nation smile. To America, Strahan is not just a success story. He is proof that scars are more beautiful than medals, that a man is not defined by what he achieves, but by what he overcomes. And then one golden late afternoon in New York, Strahan walks slowly along the sidewalk amid traffic noise and a breeze through the trees. His stride is no longer the explosive burst of his NFL days. His back is no longer ramrod straight, like when he charged the line, but every step carries a lifetime of grit, a lifetime of pain, and a lifetime of kindness. Passers-by recognize him. They smile, he smiles back, a real smile, not the TV one. In that moment his legacy is clearer than ever. A man not carried by luck, but one who built himself from ruins. A man who never used his strength to dominate others, but to lift them up. A man who was never perfect, yet left one of the deepest marks on America's heart. When we look at Michael Strahan's journey, from the bullied black kid in Germany, to the doubted NFL rookie, to defensive legend, to national TV face, to the father who never left his daughter's hospital bedside, America realizes that behind the smile, the titles, the fame are truths we've ignored for too long. And the question becomes clearer than ever. Does America truly understand the heroes it creates? Strahan's story forces us to confront lessons society can no longer ignore, lessons about fragility, pain, and what actually makes a human being. First lesson, the fragility of athletes. America worships sports. The NFL is practically a religion. We cheer bone-rattling hits and explosive plays as symbols of unbreakable strength. But we don't see the price. Strahan endured weekly car crash-level impacts, chronic back pain, degenerating joints, nerve damage, mornings he literally couldn't stand up. That's the reality many fans never consider, while watching players hoist the Lombardi Trophy. The lesson isn't pity, it's understanding. The heroes on the field, no matter how strong, are still human. They have breaking points the stadium lights never reach, and respecting them means more than cheering when they win. It means seeing them when they leave the field, tired, hurting, and more fragile than ever. Second lesson, the silent pain of celebrity. Michael Strahan is one of America's most beloved faces, but people only love the on-air version, high energy, funny, warm, making mornings easier. Few realize that to produce that smile he had to tape himself back together after sleepless nights, swallow anxiety, sweep up emotional wreckage. Fame gave him a stage but took away his right to be weak. It turned pain into something to hide, sadness into something forbidden, the real man into a puppet the public demands. America needs to understand that famous people are not invincible. They hurt, they fear, they're lonely, and sometimes they need empathy more than judgment. Third lesson, the value of family and presence. After 2 failed marriages, years chasing fame, and nights in the hospital with Isabella, Strahan learned what many only grasped too late. Success means nothing if you can't share it with the people you love. 1 minute with your child is worth more than any trophy. A quiet family dinner beats any TV contract. A simple "I love you, Daddy" heals more than a nation's praise. That's the lesson a speed-obsessed, achievement-driven America sometimes forgets presence is the only real success. Fourth lesson, healing after divorce, failure, illness. Strahan's journey shows life isn't only victories. It's pain no one prepares you for. Nights you pick yourself up off the floor. Days you keep living with a shredded heart. Healing isn't forgetting. Healing is facing it, admitting you broke, and still believing there's a reason to stand again. Strahan stood not because he's stronger than everyone else, but because falling wasn't the only option. And the final most important lesson his story gives America. A strong nation is one that sees the pain of the very heroes it creates. We cheer them at their peak and forget, or judge them when they hurt. Strahan reminds us an icon isn't someone who never breaks. An icon is someone willing to stand knowing they might break again. An icon keeps loving after being shattered. An icon lives true with a scarred heart. And those scars are what make a human beautiful, not medals, not fame, the journey back to yourself after life tried to knock you out. America looks at Michael Strahan and learns sometimes the strongest man is the one who cried the most inspiring is the one who tasted despair. The most worthy of respect is not the one who never failed, but the one who never quit. And as Strahan walks slowly but surely through every stage of life, broad shoulders heavy, eyes tired yet steady, heart aching yet warm, he proves anyone can become strong, not because they were born that way, but because they survived what felt unsurvivable. And when the TV lights go off, when the nation moves on with its day, when the noise of the world fades, we see Michael Strahan in his truest, simplest form, not the NFL legend, not the national TV star, not the face of American success, just a man, in a quiet house, on a slow evening after a long day. He starts most nights with a few physical therapy stretches, light wood floor, soft yellow lamp, wind slipping through the windows. He lies on his back, pulls one knee to his chest, then the other, rotating his hips right and left to ease the back pain that has never left since his NFL days. Every movement sends a stab down his spine, reminding him that past glory still collects its debt from his body today. But he does it every single day, no complaints, no quitting, because this body, even cracked, torn, degenerated, still lets him do the most important thing: keep living to love his children. When the pain subsides, he stands slowly, walks to the living room where his daughter waits with her favorite book. Isabella, the little girl who once lay in a hospital bed, asking if she was going to die, now sits there, hair grown long again, eyes warm, smiling when Dad walks in. He sits beside her, adjusts the blanket, and starts reading. His voice low, gentle, unhurried, not the high-energy, "Good Morning America" voice. The voice of a father who knows every minute with his child is a gift life gave him a second time. She laughs out loud at parts. She leans her head on his shoulder at others. And in those moments he looks at her, and every ache in his back, shoulders, knees, neck melts away. No spotlight is as beautiful as this moment. No medal is as precious as the warmth of his child right beside him. No victory is as complete as simply still being here to be her dad. And if we look through the window of that house, we see Michael Strahan's great story wasn't written in records, ratings, gold or diamonds. It was written in the loneliness he endured as a child, in the NFL pain he carried silently, in 2 divorces, courtrooms, and judgments that cracked his heart. In nights he sat in his car wondering if he was doing anything right, in his daughter's exhausted tears during chemo, in the terror that haunted him. If she doesn't make it, how do I go on? In mornings he braced against the wall just to stand. In evenings he swallowed anxiety to smile for the camera. But most of all, his story is written in the fact that he kept standing, kept walking, kept smiling, kept bringing light to millions every morning, even while searching for his own. Michael Strahan is not a perfect man. He made mistakes, stumbled, made choices that led to pain. But he is also the man who never gave up. The man who understands life doesn't give us what we want. It gives us what we need to become the strongest version of ourselves. And that is why, when this story ends, the image that remains is not Strahan hoisting the Lombardi Trophy, not Strahan beaming on television, but Strahan sitting quietly reading to his daughter. A small image that says everything. It says a human heart is measured not by achievements but by love. Real strength is not in muscle but in kindness. The people who make us laugh on the field or on the screen carry wounds we never see. And so the final lesson for all of us: cherish the ones who make us smile. Recognize that the greatest human strength lies in compassion and resilience. If Michael Strahan's story of grit and pain touched you, hit subscribe, not just to support the channel, but to keep honoring the unbreakable hearts that smile through storms. Looking back on Michael Strahan's journey in this story, it's impossible not to feel a deep sadness mixed with profound respect. Behind that "Good Morning America" smile is a life carved by too many cuts. The black kid lost in Mannheim, Germany, always stared at like an outsider. The teenager thrown into brutal Texas football, too slow, mocked relentlessly, yet gritting his teeth so he wouldn't be cut from his dream. The early Giants' years of injury after injury, press doubt, teammates' distrust, the constant fear of being released, only for that same man to record 22.5 sacks, win Defensive Player of the Year, and cap it with Super Bowl XL thank. Just as his private life began to fracture, marriages collapsed, and the hero on the field became lonely in his own home. The peak of tragedy came when he sat beside Isabella's hospital bed, walking away from shows and contracts, holding his frail daughter's hand after brain surgery and chemo, facing the question no father should ever hear: am I going to die? Money couldn't save her. Fame couldn't save her. only the raw helplessness and love of a father who once demolished quarterbacks, now trembling as he held his weakened child. Yet what makes Strahan worthy of reverence is that he never let those wounds turn him bitter. He still flies across the country for a 10-minute parent-teacher meeting, still braces against the wall every morning because of back pain, then walks on set to make millions smile, still chooses family and presence at 54 over chasing more spotlight. This story is a reminder that athletes and celebrities are not steel icons, they are human beings with silent pain, that family and time with those we love matter more than any championship ring, that true strength isn't never breaking, it's standing up, loving again, staying kind after life has knocked you down over and over. A more mature America is one that pauses, looks deeply at the heroes it cheers, and learns from them how to face loss, illness, divorce and failure, with compassion and grit, instead of only demanding they stay strong and entertain us. If Michael Strahan's story of resilience and pain moved you, please subscribe so we can keep exploring the extraordinary journeys behind the smiles of America's strongest hearts. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue to celebrate hearts that never surrender.